Um, let's Geraldine, Galatians chapter 5, verse 23, please. Actually, you know what? Go ahead and do 22 and 23 together.
Galatians 5:22 and 23, sir.
Yes, please.
But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law.
Okay. And by the way, I forgot to do my introduction. So, welcome to the daily Bible study for the Sealang Church of Christ. If you have been to our building, you know where we are. If, on the other hand, you are joining us from someplace else in the world or someplace else in the Philippines, we are located in the city of Silang, Cavite, Philippines, on Alganaldo Highway at kilometer 42. This makes us about 30 miles or 50 kilometers south of downtown Manila. As we continue our study of the fruit of the Spirit, we have now run into one where it's a little bit difficult. And why do I say it's a little bit difficult? The reason why it is difficult is because the underlying Greek word is protos, Prautes, protos. As we look, the King James translates this meekness. The English Standard, which is what Geraldine just read, what is that first word you see in Galatians chapter 5, verse 23? Geraldine?
It's sir. Gentleness.
Gentleness. Okay.
Gentleman.
Cora, what do you have in your NIV?
Which one? 24?
The beginning of 23, the first word.
23? Gentleness.
Gentleness, okay, as well.
Mhm.
Chris, what are you using? Big Chris, what are you using today? You're muted, brother.
ESV.
ESV. Okay. And Fred, what do you have today?
New King James.
New King James. And what is the
says
translation?
gentleness.
It says
Gentleness.
gentleness as well.
Yes.
Okay. Because there are words from one language to another one that do not always translate directly. And this is the case with the verb pratus. It does not translate directly. It may seem to overlap with similar words or ideas that what is the process? Meekness is the King James version of the translation. And it helps us if we understand how different versions of the Bible translate this same underlying Greek word. There's Old King James, there's New King James. Let's take a look in the word. If you were to be looking at the translation by Phillips, instead of gentleness or meekness, what you see is tolerance written by Phillips. We can also take a look at James chapter 1, verse 21. James chapter 1, verse 21. And Marina, that's you.
James.
Third James chapter
1.
chapter 1
verse,
and
verse 21.
21. Okay. James chapter 1, verse 21 says, therefore, put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls.
Okay, do you see the word meekness here? It's not gentleness here. It's the protus is translated in the ESV as meekness.
Meekness.
Now, if we look at the different translations, Moffat has it humble modesty in James chapter 1, verse 21. Weymouth has it as wise gentleness in James chapter 1, verse 21. Humble spirit is the New Testament. We can also take a look at James chapter 3 and verse 13. James chapter 3 and verse 13. Pearlie?
James chapter 3 verse 13, who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom.
Okay, once again, in the ESV, we have meekness as our translation. Is that what you have in your NIV, Cora?
Humility.
Humility. What do you have in a New King James, Fred?
I switched to King James. Okay, so which James 3 what?
13.
13.
13. He who is wise and understanding among you, let him show by good conduct that his works are done in the meekness of wisdom.
Okay, so you have meekness there. Wise gentleness, once again, is Weymouth translation. The Goodspeed translation says humility. Williams translation also says humility. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 15. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 15. And that'll be you, Cora.
Well, I'm sorry, say it again.
1 Peter
First
3:15.
1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, and it says, but in your heart revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have, but to do this with gentleness and respect.
Okay, pratis in your NIV is translated as gentleness here. That's also how the ESV handles it. What does the King James say there, Fred?
The New King James says meekness.
Meekness, okay. And you have ESV, right, Chris? Big Chris?
Yes.
Okay. You have ESV today, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So in 1 Peter 3:15, some of the translations, the New English Bible translates it modestly. Taylor translates it gentle. Weymouth translates it gently. Knox translates it courteously. And Berkeley, once again, says gently. You see, these words are not exactly a direct fit for the Greek verb pratos. And what we can see by examining the translators above is they're struggling to find an exact or a closest synonym for this word pratos, meaning meekness. It seems to closely resemble gentleness, humility, moderation. One of the translators says the word meekness, humility born of a trustful submission to God, and it results in gentle forgiving, unselfishness towards others. Let's study it a little bit more in detail and see if we can come firm in our own mind what this says. Now, the word appears both in the New and the Old Testament. And one writer suggests that the meekness in the Old Testament is generally associated with oppression or trials in someone's life. If someone is to be mistreated, it would be the meek. Also, the poor and the meek seem to be used interchangeably in the Old Testament. Now, Jesus quotes Isaiah chapter 61 and verse 1. Let's take a look at Isaiah chapter 61 and verse 1. And that'll be you, Giselle.
What verse, sir?
Isaiah 61 1.
Isaiah chapter 61, verse 1. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and the opening of the prison to those who are bound.
Okay. Now, there's going to be a little bit different translation when we look at Matthew chapter 11 and verse 5, when we see the translation as somebody grab it, Matthew 11 5. And whose turn is it? It would be Vanessa.
Matthew 11:5.
Matthew chapter 11, verse 5 says, The blind receive their sights, and the lame walk. Lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised up, and the poor have good news preached to them.
Give me a second. I've misquoted that. Okay. Blessed are the poor in spirit, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. But you'll see what we see here is that pratus in the New Testament is this particular situation is translated as poor. Now, we may ask ourselves why that's the case. And it might indicate that the poor are more likely the ones that possess the spirit of meekness. And the meek also had a special attention of God, and the blessings were pronounced on them. Let's go to the book of Psalms, where this is common, Psalms 22 and 6. Lailani? Twenty-two, 26, please.
Psalms 22, chapter 22, verse 26 says, The afflicted shall eat and be satisfied. Those who seek him shall praise the Lord. May your hearts live forever.
The afflicted is what's the translation that we get here for the poor. Psalm 25 and 9, Fred, Chris, Psalm 25 and 9.
Small Chris, big Chris.
Big Chris.
Psalm 25 and 9 says, He leads the humble in what is right and teaches the humble in his way.
Okay. So what do we see? We see that it is the humble. Why humble? Why meek? We can also take a look at Psalm 37:11. Psalm 37:11. That's going to be little Chris.
Psalm 37, verse 11.
Yes,
And it
please.
says, But the meek will inherit the land and enjoy peace and prosperity.
So we see it translated meek here in Psalm 37:11. This seems to be a common phrase throughout the book of Psalms, and there's several other citations that we won't hit today. However, in the New Testament, that Greek word pratus is translated by other words and other translations, as we've already demonstrated. However, this word is commonly quoted in passages from the Old Testament, which to some extent helps us to understand the word. We want to notice some of the uses in the New Testament. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 2. Fred, that's you.
Ephesians chapter 4, verse 2. And it reads, with all lowliness and meekness, with long suffering, forbearing one another in love.
Okay. Now, where you have meekness, our ESV has gentleness. What do you have in your NIV, Cora?
That's correct. Gentle.
You have gentleness. Okay.
Mhm.
So what we see is these are characteristics. We can also take a look at Colossians chapter 3, and verse 12. Francis, would you get that, please?
Colossians chapter 3, verse 12 says, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience.
Okay. Once again, we have gentleness in Colossians chapter 3 and verse 12. Is that the same thing you have you have a New King James, right, Francis?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Fred, what do you have in the, wait a minute, you have New King James
ESV.
as well.
Yeah.
What do you have in
Mhm.
NIV, Cora?
The same. I have NIV.
Okay. And all
Me
right,
and
say it again.
me and Francis. I think Fred has
New
ESV.
King James.
New
What do you
King.
have in your New King James, Fred?
And that's verse 4.
Colossians chapter 3, verse 12.
Okay, 12. And it says, therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, put on tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, long
Meekness.
suffering.
Okay.
Yeah,
We have
it's
gentleness. So we're going to see that this word keeps reoccurring as gentle or kind. The scriptures give us some identifying marks of those who are meek and or those who should show a spirit of being meek. We can see that in Matthew chapter 11 and verse 29. Matthew 11:29. Geraldine?
Matthew 11:29, sir.
Yes, please.
Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls.
Okay. Does anybody have anything other than gentle?
I have meek.
You have meek. Okay. So we see that these words are really synonymous, but who in Matthew chapter 11 and verse 29, who is meek here? It's God, Jesus the Christ. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 1. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 1, Morena.
Galatians chapter 6, verse 9.
1,
And let
verse 1.
verse 1. Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness, Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted.
Okay. Now, who is supposed to be meek, gentle? Does anybody have that rendered as meek? Fred, maybe you do.
As far as verse 9?
It's verse 1, please.
Oh, sorry. Genesis 6:1.
No, not Genesis.
Relation.
Okay.
Galatians.
Okay, maybe I was off. Galatians 6:1.
Yes.
Okay, Galatians 6:1. It's meekness, the spirit of meekness.
A spirit of meekness. So who are we being told should be meek or gentle within Galatians chapter 6 and verse 1?
Brethren.
Those who are trying to restore someone who has fallen away, right? And by the way, I'll tell you, this is another one of those Christian commands that's not always easy to do. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 4. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 4. Marina, did you just read? Okay. Furley?
First Peter chapter 3 verse 4. But let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious.
Okay. That's our Greek word pratus, gentle. Fred, in this particular case, do you have meek?
Yes. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So when we're talking about the spirit of meekness, we see gentleness. We also may want to take a look at an example of meekness and how they stand out in scripture so that we can develop some insight into the words. The two examples are maybe Moses and Christ. Let's take a look at Numbers chapter 12 and verse 3. Numbers 12 and 3, Cora.
Numbers 12:3. Ready? Numbers 12:3. Now Moses was a humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth.
Okay. That's NIV. Fred, what do you have in a New King James?
And that's Numbers 12, verse
3.
what? 3. Now, man Moses was very meek
Okay.
above
There you
all the
go.
men.
More than all the people were on the face of the earth. That's
Mhm.
the ESV translation. You have New King James. But what do we see? Moses was a great man. He was especially held out by God in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. Some of the characteristics of Moses may help us to understand why he was called a meek man. He was unassuming. He was not arrogant. His ego did not demand that others constantly flatter him. With God's help, Moses was able to face a Pharaoh and to make demands of what may have been the most powerful man on earth. Moses did not seem to possess any selfish ambitions. Moses was a helper, a servant, a leader, but a leader of great power and authority. Moses did not use his position to take advantage of other people, but rather to pray and to plead for them. He was gentle, kind, tolerant, and faithful to God. Matthew chapter 21 and verse 5. Matthew chapter 21 and verse 5. Cora, I think that's you.
I already did.
Then
21:5.
G. Matthew 21:5.
Matthew chapter 21, verse 5. Say to the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt to the fold of the beast of burden.
Okay. Humble, mounted on a donkey. 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 1. 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 1. Vanessa?
Second Corinthians chapter 10, verse 1 says, I, Paul myself, entreat you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ, I who am humbled when face to face with you, but bold toward you when I am away.
Okay. So when we look at the life of Moses and we look at the life of Christ, we see humility, humbleness, we see meekness. But when we look at the life of Christ as he lived in the Gospels, we can also come to understand what meekness is not. Meekness is not characterized by a lack of conviction. Jesus Christ was fully convinced of who he was and why he came to earth. He did not compromise 1 inch from either one. Some people may appear to us to be kind, gentle, and tolerant of others, but they don't have a conviction that they hold to. They are what we in America might call wishy-washy. Translate that to Tagalog for me, Cora.
Ouch. I don't know. Wishy-washy. I don't know. Wishy-washy.
Vanessa, Chris, Big
Why
Chris.
don't maybe Chris knows? Well, I don't know how that in Tagalog. I know how to explain it.
Explain it.
What's the
Wishy-washy though, sir, wishy-washy.
A person who's a wishy-washy.
wishy-washy? Like wishy-washy? Is that it?
No. It's a person who is
That has no conviction.
yeah, no conviction. He can be wherever the flow is, he goes with the flow. Like that.
Balimbing? No?
No.
Two-faced?
Doesn't have any conviction, doesn't have any backbone, doesn't have any skeleton to stand on.
Can stand alone. Can have her.
I don't know that in Tagalog.
Dependent?
What you got for us, Vanessa?
Is it, sir, he can, as what Ma'am Cora said, go with the flow and can stand.
On
Can't
his
stand
own.
on his own.
No conviction, no, you cannot, let's say, I'm trying to protect you and
What's that in
in,
Tagalog?
I don't know.
Okay. Plastic, maybe.
No, it's
Okay.
not. Plastic is different.
All right. Well, we see that Jesus Christ had a conviction. The meekness of Christ is not characterized by cowardice. Jesus the Christ was certainly not a coward in any sense of the word. He was meek, but he could also be firm and militant at the same time. Christians are not only commanded to be meek, but we're also commanded to defend the truth. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 15. Vanessa, I think that's you.
First Peter chapter 3, verse 2, sir.
No. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15.
15. And 15 says, but in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect.
Be prepared to make a defense. That means if somebody disagrees, you have to be able to do what? Defend your position. So we can defend the truth, and we can defend the truth meekly. We can bravely and forcefully defend what is right and what is true without stooping to ugliness on our part. And by the way, if you ever seen people get in line, since we live in this world today, you ever seen people get in an argument online?
Mhm.
Yes, sir.
When they argue, are they polite and kind and meek?
Nope.
Oh,
No, a lot of times they do what? They go back to third grade and call everybody names. That's not supposed to be our characteristics. Characteristic of meekness is not an unwillingness to discuss or expose error. Jesus, the Christ, certainly exposed the errors of the religious leaders over and over and over again. Go to Matthew chapter 15 and verse 7. Matthew chapter 15 and verse 7. Lailani?
I always associated the definition of meekness as power under control.
Okay.
Matthew chapter 15, verse 7 says, You hypocrites,
Hypocrites.
hypocrites. Well, did Isaiah prophesy of you when he said,
And give us verse 8, please, Big Chris.
Isaiah, what's the
Matthew chapter 15, verse 8.
it says, "These people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me."
Verse 8.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, verse 9, please. Little Chris.
Matthew 15, verse 9, right, sir?
Yes, please.
They worship me in vain. Their teaching were merely human rules.
Their teachings are merely human rules. We see that Christ called out error where it existed, right? And with that, since I'm 5 minutes over, we will stop the class.